Hey, and welcome to episode 6 of Think Like a Hacker. Today we've got an awesome show for you. We'll catch up on the news with Kathy Zant, and then we've got an amazing interview with Brandy Lawson. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's get started. All right, let's jump straight into the news. Kathy, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I understand we've got some follow-up with the pipdig story. I think everyone's probably getting a little bit fatigued from that, but what's going on there?
Yeah, I think I made a joke to someone that if I never hear the phrase pipdig ever again, I'll be okay with that. It's been pretty active, hasn't it?
It sure has. Yeah, our Twitter feed on Slack, it's integrated with Slack, and it's just blown up. We used to be able to keep track of it pretty easily, but it's become challenging.
It has. Well, there's a lot of people who've been using the pipdig themes, and they're very confused about all of this news. Obviously, when you find out that someone that you've trusted for so long as your theme developer has been doing some malicious activity, it comes as quite a shock. We did hear this week, though, that pipdig's hosting provider, the hosting provider that they were using and reselling services for, Kualu, is offering free hosting to affected customers. So that was an interesting turn of events. And we also saw Nikki Bloor actually posted that pipdig's hosting provider, Kualu, had commented out the malicious code that was being fed from some of their scripts that were on their server.
Right. And I guess, so the relationship between Kualu and pipdig, it sounds like Kualu was white labeling their hosting service so that pipdig could sell it. And then to customers that appeared to be pipdig's hosting service, which is a common practice. But it sounds like Kualu have now taken those customers in-house, right?
Yeah, it looks like that they've just seen so many people who are distressed about this news that they decided to help them out.
Okay, so interesting. And then that code that was commented out, that was JavaScript that was being fed into Blogger sites, right?
Yes, from what I could tell, it looked like JavaScript that was hosted within pipdig site that actually was being pulled into Blogger sites. So that was commented out by that hosting provider. And
that JavaScript was on Kualu's own servers, and that's why they had administrative access to go in there and comment out code.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary step for a hosting provider to go in and modify one of their customers' code, pieces of code, and that code is being served to their customers, if that makes sense. And Kualu took the initiative to go in there and actually change that code, which is interesting, isn't it?
It is very interesting, but you know, I mean, hosting providers, there is sort of a precedent for things like this when a hosting provider notices that, you know, a site is hacked or a site is, you know, sending out spam. I mean, we've seen a lot of our customers that come in with hacked sites and need some help getting that cleaned up. Their hosting providers will shut down their account because it is affecting their network reputation. So I think this is somewhat similar.
Interesting. So I guess another dimension to this is that Mark Jaquith, and Mark, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name, created a P3 plugin neutralizer, which he's put on GitHub. What's that about?
This appears to be a plugin that prevents pipdig's P3 plugin from updating or calling home to any malicious scripts that might exist on pipdig's URLs that could actually be used for any kind of malicious activity. The interesting thing about this is that you know, there's a lot of bloggers who aren't even, you know, I talked to a couple of people last week who weren't even sure how to swap out a theme. And so they feel sort of, I don't know, adrift at sea, having this pipdig code on their site, realizing it's malicious, but not having the technical aptitude or the ability or the funding to swap anything out. So this plugin actually neutralizes that so that you're still running the existing code. But the problem is with something like this is the problem isn't necessarily the code. The problem is the trust factor with the developer, that if they've done this in the past, they could, add something else. But it's not updating, so at least it buys you some time. I would guess that would be the reason to use something like this.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess one interesting thing about this is that Mark Jaquith is really well known in the WordPress community. I believe he's been a core developer. I'm not actually super familiar with his resume. I just know that he's a very prominent personality. I think he's a core developer, core contributor, and he plays a few other roles. You see him doing talks at WordCamps and so on, and they're very well attended. And so it's just interesting that someone who is that prominent in the community kind of stepped forward and created this plugin neutralizer, which I think is kind of cool. So nice job there, Mark. And just to get back to what you were saying, Kathy, I guess I've noticed the same thing, where so pipdig really seemed to target the fashion blogger market, right?
Yeah.
And
as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and so those folks are presumably not developers, not they are good at other things like fashion and so on, and they just want to publish their stories and content and news and that kind of thing. And they've been relying on this theme developer for some time now, and they're just looking for a new. They're just looking to actually do their job, and so it's a real pain for them, because first they have to figure out what to do, whether they have to change themes or not, and then they actually have to go and implement a theme change, which is a real pain. It's a lot of work. It's essentially redeveloping your whole site in some cases. And I know that we're harping on this pipdig thing. We've covered it in last week's podcast and so on, but I think it's really interesting because it gives you an interesting view into certain aspects of the WordPress community, how the community collaborates on certain things, how things get done, how news about a security weakness or a vulnerability gets out there, and how it's received by people and so on. So I think it's worth tracking. And then I guess Pagely banned the plugin from their servers, which was an interesting step as well. And then there's some rumors on the Twitter sphere, right, Kathy?
Yeah, there's been some rumors that Google was starting to show sites using pipdig's code as having malware, but this was showing up in Search Console. I've not been able to find any site that's actually that uses a pipdig theme that's actually showing like the red screen of death that the site is malicious. So I haven't seen that yet. So it may have been just sort of a preliminary step on Google's part, but I haven't been able to corroborate that this is like shutting down sites.
Okay. All right. Well, I tell you what, how about we promise not to cover pipdig in next week's podcast?
Please, pipdig, don't do anything else.
Yeah, just don't make the news again. We'd appreciate that. There is a Twitter moment which sums up the elements of the story, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. And if you've been not paying attention to the story, or you just want the cliff notes, it's actually a pretty good source for that. And I actually have a train coming by here right now, so that's gonna we'll just keep recording, and you'll hear the train in the distance. But yeah, should we move on to the next item here?
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Well, last week we covered Jetpack, and they were injecting some results into your search results in your WordPress site, where if you are looking for a new plugin, you go to the plugins area on the site and you type in your search criteria in the search box, and you hit enter or whatever, and a list of plugins that match your criteria would come up, and then you'd pick, if it's a security plugin, you obviously choose Wordfence or whatever alternative you choose. But Jetpack were putting a search result at the top of those search results. They were kind of injecting it in there, and that created a bit of a hoopla. And we covered that in last week's podcast. And I guess I thought I heard that they had removed that search result, but actually they didn't. They just tweaked it slightly, right, Kathy?
Yeah, WP Tavern covered this, and Jetpack wrote about it on their site as well. But so what they did was they removed this feature for paid upgrades for the Jetpack plugin. And we actually had one of our QA people, Ram, tested this out and did some searches. And so he searched for a number of different terms on a test site that we have Jetpack on. And he showed that certain searches for paid aspects of Jetpack were not showing any suggestions, but that when he was putting something for a free feature of Jetpack, that suggestion was still showing up. So it's that's the way they're addressing, I think, the community furor around, you know, the commercialization of search results within the plugin dashboard. And it's an interesting solution to, it's a complex problem. I mean, Jetpack has, do you know, is it like 45 different features that are part of Jetpack?
It's definitely up there with the kitchen sink.
Yeah, it definitely is. There's so much to Jetpack. I actually installed it on one of my test sites and it took forever to load. And there's so much to it, and so there's sort of a complex problem for Jetpack. How do you show to your end user who has this feature already resident in an installed plugin? How do you show them, hey, you're not taking advantage of the full capabilities of the plugin? Is this the right way of doing it? I don't know. Yeah,
yeah, and I think that really sums up the honest problem that I suspect that they're trying to solve, which is, hey, you already have this thing installed. I know you're looking for it in the plugin repo, but have you tried the thing that you already have installed? Because it means you don't have to install a new plugin to get the feature. It's already in Jetpack. So I mean, that's the one aspect. But then the other aspect is that Jetpack does some things that other plugins do, and so other plugin authors might feel that this is anti-competitive behavior. You know, I don't know. I don't have a strong point of view either way, but I think that probably frames the argument reasonably well.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. It was interesting to me to watch how passionate everyone who took a position on what was happening with Jetpack and the idea of advertising within the plugin dashboard. There are so many passionate people within the WordPress community.
No.
They're
really? You're joking.
I know. This is shocking news to you, Mark.
Breaking news. Passionate people in the WordPress community. Politics. Drama. Wow.
Conflict and hurt feelings, and there was a lot of there were a lot of people who were just like very upset about all of this. And the thing that I kind of took a step back over this weekend and thought a lot about this conflict and the passion and the emotions getting kind of heated with all of this. And it's interesting to me because it's such a diverse community with so many different views and so many different ways of considering how things should happen, or what the mission of WordPress.org actually is. And I don't think conflict is avoidable in an open source community. What do you think?
No, I don't think it's avoidable. And I think that it might be a healthy sign as long as people aren't being damaged in the process. Because I think that it might be a sign of productivity. Things are getting done. And when things are getting done, you know, decisions are being made and choices are being made, design choices, choices in how to implement the software, the back-end stuff, and so on. And if you've got people collaborating, there's going to be disagreement. There's going to be things that you need to decide on. You know, does the user interface widget look like this, or does it look like that? Does the back-end store data like this, or does it store it like that? And some people are going to have a very passionate point of view about that, and that's because they're deeply engaged in creating WordPress, and I think that's healthy. But Kathy, do you feel like going off script for a moment?
Let's go off script.
Should we do it? All right.
Sure.
I literally have no notes about this in front of me, but Mika wrote an interesting blog post, didn't she?
Yeah.
Do you wanna give the cliff notes, or should I give it a shot?
Why don't you give it a shot, because I have to like load it back up again.
Yeah, I know. So I think there's a lot there, but Mika Epstein is a it would be interesting if you could measure the amount of time she has spent contributing to the WordPress community. It's been probably more than a decade, maybe. In the blog post, I feel like it said 7 years, but it seems like it was longer than that. It's been longer than that. But Mika is one of the moderators. She, I think she kind of runs the open source plugin repo. She has donated a huge amount of her time to WordPress and is very passionate and so on. And I guess that when things happen in the plugin repo, if plugins are removed from the official WordPress.org plugin repo, it sounds like she makes that decision, or at least collaborates closely with a group of folks that make that decision. And I think that because of that, she's the target of any controversy around plugins being removed for a security reason or some other reason. And she just wrote a long philosophical post thinking out loud about what that's like, what that's been like over the last 7+ years. I apologize, Mika, if it's been much longer than that. And I think it's an interesting read. And so I'm not gonna spoil it, but it just gives you a little bit of perception of what it's like to be, I guess, the tip of the spear when it comes to deciding what's going to be allowed in the repo and what isn't, and what needs to be removed, and which developers are doing bad things, and so on. And to be honest, I think that she's done a pretty darn good job so far. So we'll add that to the show notes.
Definitely. And the thing that impressed me, and I think I actually, like Friday, posted this in our channel where we discuss this kind of news items for the podcast. The thing that impressed me the most is the awareness that Mika has about the power she wields, about the responsibility that she has, and how seriously she takes that. And I found it incredibly it touched my heart, because you just see her humanity in it, and how she really realizes what an important job she has, and that the decisions that she makes affect so many people, and it affects this entire community. And I just think she's a really cool person doing a very difficult job, and deserves much more support than she gets sometimes.
Yeah, and she is a cool person. I've had the pleasure of meeting her at WordCamp US briefly, and
me too.
she's a very nice person. And I guess perhaps from me and you, Kathy, we could just say thanks very much, Mika, for doing the job you do, and keep doing it. We don't want to lose you, and I know that you. It sounds like you've had plenty of frustrating moments, but we need you.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
Yeah. All right, let's get back on script. So let's see. We've got Grammarly. Ooh, fun. You want to take this one?
Grammarly. Oh, yeah. So have you ever used Grammarly, Mark?
I have certainly been a user of their ads, a viewer of their ads. I see them all the time on, I think, YouTube and all over the internet. And they have not convinced me to try their service yet.
Okay, well, that's probably a good thing. Okay, so Grammarly is a browser plugin. There's also, I think, a standalone app. But what I've seen mostly is this browser plugin that you can use, so that if you're using Gmail or Google Docs or whatever, you can actually have your grammar corrected. So it will tell you everything from spelling errors to grammatical errors, and trying to improve your writing. So plenty of people use this tool so that they can improve their writing. Because what are we doing on the internet 90% of the time? We are writing. So it has a paid version, but it also has a free version. A user actually started reading the terms of service, which is commendable right there that somebody actually dove into the terms of service. Totally. I mean, how many things do we sign up for? How many services do we use that we actually go and read the terms of service? When they took a look at the terms of service, they saw that there were some concerning things in those terms. Mark, did you take a look at the terms?
I did not. I read the Cliff Notes, and the Cliff Notes were posted by DuckDuckGo and their Twitter account, which to be honest, I think is weird, because DuckDuckGo is a search engine. It's an alternative search engine to Google, and I guess their spiel is that they're the internet privacy company. I just thought it was interesting that they posted this thing about Grammarly. After digging into Grammarly's privacy policy, this Reddit user decided to uninstall. Why? He found that Grammarly collects everything you type into the browser with the extension, can store that data indefinitely, and may share it with third parties. And so I just thought it was interesting that DuckDuckGo posted that. But the story is actually on Reddit, and on Reddit they call out the individual elements in the terms of service that are concerning. And I guess the thing that really jumped out at me is that it sounds like Grammarly have structured things so that they can capture what you're typing into their service, and then they can share that with third parties. So companies that they do business with, which is, I don't know, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. How about you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, but if you think about it, in order to use this service, it has to be looking at what you're typing. In order to tell you that your grammar is wrong, it essentially has to be a keylogger. What it's doing with that data, once it's, logging it and comparing it against whatever algorithms tell you that, your grammar's bad, that's where it gets concerning. The fact that they are reserving the right to share it with third parties, that they're reserving the right to store it. But there's so many other services that we are typing information into. I mean, Google Docs, that is a cloud-based service where you are actually storing all of your information, right?
Yeah, and I had a look at Google's terms of service for when I was researching this story, and I didn't immediately see anything there that talks about them sharing your data with a third party. But as you point out, to use Google Docs, they have to store your document. And so it kind of makes sense that to use Grammarly, they have to see your grammar to help you with your grammar. And I think that storing that data is not necessarily a huge overstep, but sharing it with third parties gets interesting because, I had a quick look at Grammarly's business model, and if I can find my notes here, if I recall, they charge about $30 a month for a paid version. The free version is apparently great. The paid version is like, it gives you a little bit more, but it doesn't sound super compelling just based on some of the reviews that I've seen. And so that's $30 a month. I've run this kind of business a fair amount, and I know how challenging it is to get free users to upgrade to a paid version. And so just thinking about this, I think that they're going to potentially explore other business models, and one of those might be ads. And so it gets interesting then, because if they've given themselves the ability to share your text or your grammar with a third party, there's some obvious synergy there, and that is that they would share that text with an ad network, and that ad network would target ads to you based on the content of your text. And so you have to decide if you're comfortable with that or not. And to be clear, I'm speculating here. I don't know that Grammarly have any plans to do this. Maybe they're doing it already. Maybe they plan to do it. Maybe they're never going to do it. But that's the kind of thing that this opens up. And so I think that when you're evaluating a company that you're going to give data to, there's a few questions that you want to ask yourself before you hand over that data. And that is, who is the company? Where are they based? What is their reputation? How long have they been around? What data do they collect? What do they do with it? And who do they share it with? And I think that a really good starting point for that is a company's privacy policy and their terms of service, because that'll often have the company name, their business address. You can tell often by reading those documents whether it's just they've just kind of copy pasted their terms of service, or if it's actually been well written by a legal team, which suggests that the company can afford a legal team, is going to be solvent for a while, is professional enough to have done that, and so on. So I think that would probably be a good starting point. What do you think, Kathy?
Definitely. And then I think you take all of that information and you put it sort of on the other side of the scale of how much is this service actually improving your life, right? How much do you need this? Do the privacy concerns, if you have any whatsoever, actually balance out with what you really need that service for? Like Grammarly, do you really need that? Are the risks balanced against the rewards, I guess?
Oh, you are so making me want to dive into our Facebook story right now, but we have to get through a healthcare story first.
Let's go to Facebook.
But that's such a great segue, because that idea of risk reward, how much benefit do you derive from Gmail? And it's actually an interesting question, because should you let that guide your thinking about their behavior, about how much data you're prepared to hand over? I guess it does, right? I mean, it just does affect your decision making. I think that's the reality of it. Yeah.
Definitely does. I mean, Gmail. I mean, did you remember when you first started using Gmail and it was just night and day? I think I went from like Thunderbird to Gmail, or maybe Outlook to Gmail, and it was just like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was so, I mean, in terms of user interface and usability and being able to search emails and then the spam filters, the usability, there's tons of benefits to me using it, right? It's a free service. And I see ads. But I'm willing to balance all of that because of the usability and what it gives me.
Yeah, I'm really with you on that. You know, like philosophically, I want to disagree and I want to say, oh no, you should evaluate every company and their privacy policy and their terms of service objectively. But I think the reality is, if it is as useful as Gmail is to me too, I agree with you that it's super useful. And it was a game changer for me as well. I came over from Hotmail. Then it's really going to influence how much you're prepared to tolerate in terms of what they do with your data and what they do with or to your privacy and so on. But yeah, I came over from Hotmail to Gmail and it was like, wow, this is the way web-based email should be done, especially with the search function, which of course Google's very good at.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, I'm again, you know, we're kind of going off script here a little bit, but few people realize or think about the fact that Google is actually the great imitator. It's hard for me to think about a single new thing that they did. You can count PageRank as a new thing, but I'm really talking about products. You know, they search had already been done, and Google just did search better. Web-based email had already been done. Google just did it better. Maps had already been done by MapQuest, and Google just did it better. Android. You know, I think iOS had already been done, and Google did Android, which is, well, I'm not going to go there, but you know, so they're kind of the great imitator. But all right, let's get back on track here. So our next story is from The Verge, and or at least the inspiration for the story comes from The Verge, and I guess the crux of the story is that. What some researchers in Israel discovered, and we'll get to that in a moment. But you know, really, what we want to focus on here is the healthcare industry and how they have been the subject of some horrendous cyber attacks in the past. And there goes my train again in the background. But in spring 2017, the WannaCry malware infected thousands of computers. Probably hundreds of thousands of computers around the world, but it really hit the UK's NHS National Healthcare Service hard. I was doing some research on the story, and I ran across these numbers which I hadn't seen before, but it cost the NHS £92 million, and wow. 19,000 appointments were cancelled, which is huge, and 5 hospitals diverted ambulances when the WannaCry ransomware attack was underway. And
wow.
And so basically WannaCry infected machines at hospitals with ransomware and made them inaccessible and threw the NHS into a little bit of chaos. And what really made us think about healthcare is this really cool story from the Washington Post. Researchers in Israel have announced that they've created a computer virus capable of adding tumors into a CT and MRI scans. Kathy's notes over here, this is bananas.
It's completely bananas. This is something for like a science fiction movie. Like if you could make a malware sci-fi movie, this is it, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's amazing. So to get into the actually this was your phrase as well. It sounds like a medical Stuxnet, and if you're unfamiliar with Stuxnet, it's considered by many to be the most sophisticated piece of software ever written. But it was software that was allegedly written by the NSA to target nuclear refinement facility in Natanz in Iran, and right. Actually. I think they were uranium centrifuges, and I believe it did that successfully. But this level of sophistication is kind of up there with nation-state threat actors like the U.S., like Israel, Russia, China, and so on. Threat actors that have essentially unlimited funding, large teams of highly competent people, and a lot of time. and so the way this worked is that, well, let me give the researchers credit first. So it's Yezrul Mirsky and Yuval Elaviki are the researchers at Ben Gurion University Cybersecurity Research Center in Israel. They created the malware. And this malware was really to demonstrate capability. And the way it works is that CT and MRI scans use something called a PAX network, which is a picture archiving and communication system. And the PAX network is unencrypted, and the images from CT and MRI are passed across the network. So attackers can listen into the images transmitted across the network if they gain access to the hospital network. And in reading the article, it sounds like a lot of those hospital networks are actually connected to the internet, hopefully firewalled, but still there's a way to get in there. They're not air-gapped, in other words. And an attacker can listen to the images transmitted across the network and potentially modify them. What the researchers are suggesting to mitigate this is that the images passing across the PAX network from MRI and CT machines to radiologists and then ultimately to a physician should be digitally signed. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that, but in their research, they actually tried out these modified images on radiologists, and radiologists diagnosed cancer 99% of the time, where the researchers had fabricated cancerous nodules on the image. And in cases where the malware removed real cancerous nodules from scans, the radiologist said that those patients were healthy 94% of the time. So that's a huge, success rate if you're a threat researcher, or failure rate if you're running one of these systems. But I guess it's worth pointing out here that this research is somewhat theoretical, because I think that there's a lot of steps that need to be taken by a threat actor if they're going to compromise a hospital network, implant malware, successfully have it modify MRI and CT scans on a specific patient. There's a lot that needs to happen, and there's a lot that needs to happen, or rather, the threat actor needs to do all of those things without being detected. And so this is a theoretical study, but I think it's a very interesting demonstration of capability. And it's also very interesting when it comes to demonstrating the kinds of threats that malware can pose in the case of the medical industry. So the example that they use is that they could potentially target a presidential candidate or another politician and trick them into believing that they have a serious illness and cause them to withdraw from a race to seek treatment. And that really illustrates the kind of use that a nation-state actor would, or threat actor would have, for this kind of malware and this level of sophistication, and the motivation that they might have to invest in this sort of malware. Pretty nuts, eh, Kathy?
It's completely nuts. But, I've seen that documentary on Stuxnet and studied what happened there, and that was pretty nuts too. So I don't think, while this is completely theoretical, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility in certain areas, in terms of political espionage and things like that. It could happen.
Yeah. It definitely notches up the level of dystopian future that we live in, right?
It's completely crazy. And I guess get second opinions if you're a political candidate. Don't trust your CT scans.
Since we're chatting about WannaCry, there's an interesting side story here, and that is that Marcus Hutchins is a researcher, a UK-based researcher, who was, in 2017, when the WannaCry malware or ransomware outbreak happened, he actually reverse engineered WannaCry and discovered that there was a kill switch in WannaCry, and all he had to do was register a domain and it would stop WannaCry from spreading. And so he did that, and he stopped WannaCry, which was a global threat at the time and obviously did a lot of damage. What's really interesting about that story is that was in May 2017. In August 2017, Marcus was arrested at McCarran International Airport by the FBI when he was trying to return home from DEF CON. And he was arrested for creating the Kronos banking Trojan and also a spyware called the UPass kit. And Marcus is still going through this process. He's actually don't quote me on this, but I'm reasonably sure he's under house arrest in Los Angeles, and he's still kind of working his way through the court system, being based in the US now, even though he lives in the UK. I guess he can't leave. And the latest update on his case is that he made a bid to suppress evidence that he gave to the FBI while intoxicated, because he was at DEF CON. He'd had a few drinks. He was at the airport, I guess, waiting to go home, and they arrested him and then interrogated him. So he was trying to get that evidence suppressed. And so it's just an interesting story, because, you've got this sort of, on the one hand, he saved the world from WannaCry.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, and I think this was when he was a teenager, because if he's in his 20s now, he created malware, allegedly, the Kronos banking Trojan and the UPass kit. And so he's been arrested and basically held under house arrest since 2017. And he's still in the US and still kind of working his way through the system. So it's just an interesting tangent, kind of an interesting side story, since we're chatting about the healthcare system and WannaCry and how its impact on that. But yeah, do we get to talk about Facebook now?
Now we get to talk about Facebook.
Awesome. All right.
Your favorite, right?
Maybe you should take this one, because I might just fly off the handle.
Yeah. Okay. You're not allowed to say anything bad about Facebook during this segment, right?
In that case, I just won't speak.
Yeah. Yeah, not going to happen. Okay, so Facebook has a number of privacy woes over the last week. The first article that I saw came out of Ars Technica, that Facebook was noted that they were asking some users for email passwords. So basically, they wanted to authenticate you, and so in order to authenticate you, they needed to have your password for Gmail or Hotmail or whatever email service you used when you signed up for Facebook. What do you think about that, Mark?
I think it's insane. And I just want to say it again, because it's unbelievable. New user accounts on April 2nd signing up for Facebook were being asked for their email address and their password to their email system, which is just like, what? And to be clear, Gmail was not one of the email providers that were hit by this, because Facebook uses OAuth to authenticate your Gmail account, but it was non-Gmail accounts, non-Gmail email accounts that Facebook would ask you for your password. And a spokesperson from Facebook said that the email passwords were not stored by Facebook, which doesn't really make it all okay, but unbelievable.
Yeah. So like the rule would be for an end user, if anything asks you for a password and it feels like maybe they don't need that password for any reason. The other thing that confuses me about this story is there are new users for Facebook. There are new people. I mean, I know a lot of people who are like still using Facebook, but I know more people who are leaving Facebook than there are new people signing up, unless maybe they're kids like that. But even like my kids' friends, nobody uses Facebook, so I don't know who these new users are. I find this just odd. This whole story just seems bizarro.
Yeah, it is bizarro. I think that's a good way to put it. And so there's a little bit of history here, and for the life of me, I couldn't find this company when I was researching it right before the podcast. But there was a company that was based in Indonesia or the Philippines, one of the two, and they were making a PHP library that you could use in your PHP applications to essentially add virality to your application. And the way it would work is this library would give you the ability to write an application where, as users were signing up, they give you they somehow integrate their email inbox. I think it might have been handing over your credentials, or there were other, it might have been OAuth, I forget, but this library would import your contacts list into the application, and then you could then provide a way for the user to select their contacts, to email their friends and invite them to the service. And so the whole viral loop that Facebook is built around is this concept of inviting your friends. So when you sign up, the idea is that they encourage you to basically import contact lists from as many sources as possible into Facebook, and then Facebook has the ability to contact those folks and say, hey, Kathy's joined Facebook, why don't you join too? Now, Facebook is very mature in terms of a viral application, but that's the foundation that Facebook were built on. And the reason I wanted to find this PHP company is because back in it was about somewhere between 2005 and 2008, and these folks were making this library for PHP developers so that people could essentially create their own Facebook, their own viral application that had a viral loop, and it was email based, which is super, super effective. It has a very short cycle time. Someone will sign up for Facebook, the emails will go out within minutes. Those other people have signed up as well, and the viral loop continues. So it's super, super effective. Facebook bought these guys, and
wow.
I'm sure that, and well, I'm speculating, but I'm pretty sure that the reason they bought them is to just take them off the market, so that other folks cannot create a PHP application which has the same viral hooks that Facebook had and has. And as a reminder, Facebook's just was a PHP application. That's how they started, and so anyone can do what they did. But anyway, I will try to find that company. Although I did spend some time doing it, and I didn't have much luck. But do I get to rant now, Kathy? Or
you get to rant?
Can I rant? Okay, all right.
There's so many things.
Okay, all right. So this thing about Facebook asking for your email password is it's a little bit absurd and a little bit weird. But I have a feeling that they view themselves a little differently to most internet application companies that make a web application or an app or something like that. I think they see themselves as a part of the plumbing of the internet, and so perhaps that kind of loosens the moral compass a little bit and makes it easier to make silly choices like that. But in Mark Zuckerberg's latest blog post, where he basically frames the company as transforming itself into a privacy-focused company and a private social network, I grabbed a quote from there, and I just wanted to share this with you because I think this, along with some data, really kind of helps frame what's going on here. He says, in the last year, I've spoken with dissidents who've told me encryption is the reason they're free or even alive. Governments often make unlawful demands for data, and while we push back and fight these requests in court, there's always a risk we'll lose a case. And if the information isn't encrypted, we'd either have to turn over the data or risk our employees being arrested if we fail to comply. This may seem extreme, but we've had a case where one of our employees was actually jailed for not providing access to someone's private information, even though we couldn't access it since it was encrypted. Now, I think that quote's very interesting when you contrast it with some of this data. So if you go to transparency.facebook.com, you can look at their transparency report, and you can see the number of requests that governments globally have made to Facebook for data and how often they actually hand over that data. And from July 2017 to June 2018, Facebook handed over 185,000 requests from governments for user data. They received 185,000 requests from governments for user data. On average, during that period, they handed over data 74% of the time. For the same period in 2013, they saw just 53,000 requests. And so the number of requests are obviously increasing significantly. The rate at which they've produced data, if you look at 2013 versus 2017, where they actually hand over data to the government, is it's increased from 63% to 74%. Of the time. The current percentage of requests when data is produced, it averages at 74%, and that's a global average. In the USA, it's 86% of the time Facebook will hand over data when a government requests data on an individual. In the UK, it's 91% of the time. That means that 91 out of 100 requests in the UK for data result in Facebook handing over your data. And so Kathy and I had a conversation off camera before the show, saying, well, why is this a problem? And we looked at what countries this might be a problem in, and the Maldives is one that jumped out at us. So, for example, in the Maldives, they requested access to 20 accounts from January to June 2018. So the Maldivian government requested access to 20 accounts from January to June 2018. 69% of the time, Facebook handed over the data. So that's about 14 accounts. It's either 13 or 14 accounts, depending on which direction they rounded in. Now, in the Maldives, homosexuality is illegal. The penalty for homosexuality for men, the punishment is banishment for 9 months to 1 year, or a whipping of 10 to 30 strokes. For women, it's house arrest for 9 months to 1 year. And so this really illustrates why this is a problem, and why it's important to have private spaces. And I mentioned this example a lot, but at RSA a few years ago, Moxie Marlinspike, who is the creator of the Signal app, which is an encrypted communications app, Moxie was on stage with the RSA guys, so Rivest and Shamir and so on, and they were actually getting the Turing Award at the time, and Moxie was on a panel with him, which I thought was very impressive, and it said a lot for his credentials. And he explained why private spaces are important. Obviously, he's a proponent for cryptography for everyone and not providing backdoors to governments. And he said that the reason it's important to have private spaces is because sometimes one needs to break the law for societies to progress. And I think the Maldivian example is a really good illustration of that. So in most developed countries around the world, gay marriage is legal now, and being in a gay relationship is considered acceptable, and it's not against the law, and you're not going to get whipped for it. Well, the Maldives have, they've got a little ways to go before they get to that point. It's still illegal there, and the punishment, if you're a guy, is whipping, lashes, essentially 10 to 30 lashes. And so what Facebook are doing, on Facebook, people will post images of their spouses, of their friends, of the people that they love, and so on. And so the idea that you might have a private Facebook profile, but the Maldivian government can send a request to Facebook saying, well, we want to see that guy's private data, and Facebook hand it over 69% of the time, you begin to understand why this is a problem. That is my data-driven rant on Facebook. I understand, as we were saying earlier in the podcast, that it's an extremely useful application. It's a way a lot of people use to stay in touch with their families. And so, as we were saying earlier, Kathy, it's really a trade-off. It's like how much, lack of privacy or weird terms of service are you willing to tolerate? And I guess that depends on how valuable or useful the application is to you. Well, that's one of the things that affects it, right?
Sure. Well, okay, so let's take the Maldives example again. Say a guy posts a picture that is innocuous and he knows the laws, but he posts a picture that someone else construes as being breaking this law against homosexuality because maybe he's hugging another man or something like that. There's so many slippery slopes that could be interpreted in a certain way, and for these types of governments, and I was looking at some of the data since we brought this up earlier. I started poking around and looking at the sheer volume. So you said like the United States is 86% of the requests from United States governments are being answered by Facebook. The volume is incredible. Like Maldives was just like 20, but I mean, some of these other governmental agencies that are going at Facebook and saying we need data, it's massive. Yeah. And all of these slippery slopes, or all of these bits of data that could be used in a court of law to paint a case that may be not even true. Who knows? It's a strange kind of surveillance that seems to be happening in a place where people, what are you throwing into the balance for this? Staying connected with your friends and family. There's got to be a better way. Like the old days of picking up the phone and calling mom, sending a picture via text. There's other ways. Putting everything about yourself and your friends and your family all into one giant searchable database that is being used by governments around the world right now. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, and this isn't some conspiracy theory stuff. Just to illustrate, so investigators have used a kind of graph analysis for decades. If you look at those old cop shows where you've got a bunch of pictures on a board and string connecting them, that's just a graph. It's a bunch of nodes that are connected by vertices, and it illustrates relationships. And that's generally how one does an investigation. Is you have a threat actor who uses a phone, and you'll have a piece of string between the threat actor and his phone, and which people that phone has made a phone call to, and so you'll have those links and so on. So that graph analysis is the way that investigators think. And if you look at software that investigators use, there's I don't know if Maltego is still free, but that's I think it might still be free. So Maltego is a great piece of software that you can grab, and you can actually do that kind of investigation using Maltego. And we've used Maltego in the past to investigate very complex threat actors with lots of moving parts. There's much more sophisticated software out there, and one of them is Palantir, and Palantir can ingest a huge amount of data. And it lets investigators, and specifically government investigators, do graph analysis on massive amounts of data. So they can investigate terrorist threat actors, cybersecurity threat actors, and so on. And my co-founder and I have been to conferences where we've seen district attorneys, I think she was from San Diego, raving about Palantir and what a game changer that's been for them. And on the one hand, one wants to have crimes solved. That's kind of cool when that happens. That's why we pay our taxes and so on. But on the other hand, if you think about it in those terms, what Facebook is it's a giant graph database. You literally could not ask for a better investigative data source than Facebook, because it's this huge amount of data, this huge trove of data on individuals and the various things associated with them. But it also has the graph. It's got all of the connections, known associates, your photos, where you've been, and so on. And so you just literally have to slurp that into an investigative tool, and most of the data is already structured, and you just add your own data to it, and off you go. And so when you think about this sort of cost-benefit analysis of handing over your data to Facebook, I think it's helpful to think about it in those terms. I'm not saying flee right now. Maybe you want to use Facebook. I left a while ago, but that'll just help your arithmetic when you're trying to figure out if Facebook still works for you or not.
There's more, Mark.
Oh no.
It's not just the fact that you're putting all of your personal information into the hands of governments that may or may not want to build a case. So the same Ars Technica article also noted that UpGuard had found 2 publicly accessible caches of Facebook user data that were created by third-party applications. So like apps that you give permission to, games, things like that. They actually were taking data off of Facebook and putting it on Amazon S3 buckets and keeping it public so that anybody could access that information. What do you think about that?
Well, so this is very similar to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where they were mining data from Facebook, and they got caught with data that supposedly they shouldn't have, but apparently it's still happening, and the external companies that are getting access to Facebook data are leaving some of that data lying around for the general public to consume. All right, and we're not done with Facebook. Just to wrap up, we've got one final story over here from Thales Intelligence, which is Cisco's intelligence team, and they discovered that a number of Facebook groups are dedicated to spamming, stealing credit cards, DDoS services, identity theft, and so on. And we will definitely leave that in the show notes as well. But it turns out that threat actors are actually using Facebook as an opportunity to network. But I think that's probably fairly predictable. Bad people are gonna congregate on the more popular platforms that allow them to collaborate, right, Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening in other areas. It's happening in other places on the internet. It's just, there's these groups, and every time that these malicious groups are brought to the attention of Facebook, they're quashed, and then they kind of, sprout up again with a different name. So it's just, Facebook kind of is reflecting just human nature in this regard.
All right, that wraps the news for today. Let's get on to our interview. We have an awesome interview for you today with Brandy Lawson. Brandy her company is Fiery Effects, and she is actually a mentor's mentor, or a coach's coach, if you like. Her clients are coaches, speakers, and authors, and she helps purpose-driven women who are trying to make a change and who are trying to have impact on the world. Brandy helps them be more effective. I really enjoyed chatting with Brandy, and I almost enjoyed editing the interview that we shot with her as much as I enjoyed chatting with her in real life, because I had more time to actually pay attention to what she was saying, and it was really, really interesting. So I think you're going to enjoy the interview very much. Here's Brandy Lawson.
I'm Brandy Lawson. My company is Fiery Effects. We are a digital agency, but pretty small. We're a boutique, and we specialize in helping purpose-driven women who are trying to make a change or an impact in the world. So we help them ignite their influence through the use of marketing and technology. A lot of that includes strategy and websites and also metrics, but mostly I am really passionate about making sure entrepreneurs are using technology correctly and not abusing it. So typically our clients are coaches, speakers, or authors. They have some larger purpose that's driving them. So one of my clients is really trying to get parity in leadership in corporations by 2025, 50-50 women and men. Another one of my clients is really about helping people live their best life. Risk blossoming is kind of how she calls it, and she and her husband have retired and now are living in an RV. So they're women who are trying to make an impact on the world. That's who I'm helping. And typically they don't know a lot about technology, or they're intimidated by technology, or they've just reached a point that they've built their business through speaking and networking and shaking hands and kissing babies, but there's no more time in the day. And so they're maxed out and they don't know what to do next, because at this point they have not made that impact that they're trying to make in the world. So my job is to help them figure out how to scale their impact, to basically use marketing technology to make their lives more efficient and effective and reach and touch more people so that they can have their impact in the world. But a lot of common patterns when any business owner reaches a certain level of success is that what they've done to that point, they're just trying to do more of. And I'm sure we've read, you've heard of the book, like what got you here is not going to get you there. The idea that you have to kind of change some of the fundamental things that you've done or figured out that got you here to get you to the next level. So a lot of pitfalls are just harder, just working harder, just doing more of the same thing, as opposed to stepping back and going, oh wait, this worked to here, but now I no longer can exchange 4 emails with a client to book a phone call. I no longer can, if I'm out of hours, I was getting 5 clients from every speaking gig I was doing, so I just increased the number of speaking gigs, but now I can't do more speaking gigs because I'm out of time. So a lot of it was just like the beating your head against the same brick wall. So, and the pitfall is then they think, oh crap, I'm never going to get to do this big thing that I've imagined. And they, at that point, maybe don't know who to trust also about getting the right advice, because I really want people to do whatever it is they want to do. One of the terminologies I use is don't should on yourself, because this is another pitfall, is that we let other perspectives influence where we're going. And a lot of times I'll be talking with a client or even some other digital agencies, and they'll get into this and they'll start using should. Well, I should be doing this, and I shouldn't do that. And I'm like, I want just one of those little poop emoji pillows and hold it up and like, stop shoulding on yourself. There's no thing you should do. There's only the things that you could do or want to do, and don't let other people tell you. So those are some of the common pitfalls or problems that people are encountering when they're ready to talk to me. Well, actually, one of my current clients, she is new to commercial real estate, but she is a commercial pilot. She has a doctorate in manufacturing machine parts. She's an extremely smart woman, but she's now in a new place. And the inside the box talk about, well, you haven't closed on any deals, you haven't done, has really kept her from succeeding as quickly as she could, because she's listening to all of the inside the bubble stuff as opposed to the, well, honestly, the person who needs you and your expertise because you understand aviation and you understand manufacturing and you understand commercial real estate, and so for aerospace manufacturers that's going to be crazy valuable. They probably don't care how many deals you've done so far because you have the expertise and the backup and this. So that thinking that encloses us, that when we lose the perspective, that is one of the funnest problems to solve. But there's an iteration of that with most every client I've worked with, and even like with myself, because at a point I was doing websites, and I didn't love it. I didn't want to do websites anymore because they weren't doing something for people. Well, I had to have an external perspective come along and be like, well, you already know that there's this possibility to help them identify their goals and then figure out what marketing meets their goals and then make the website work. That, of course, I just have to start with the strategy instead of starting with the website. So it's always that external perspective that it's not just my clients, but I also needed that. Many times with clients, I try not to just give them the answers, because if I give them the answers, they're not their answers, and then I'm also invested in the answer, perhaps more than they're invested in the answer. So then it can be really kind of soul crushing if they decide not to do anything with the information. But I'm really trying more with my clients to lead them to their own conclusions, because I don't want to be one more person shitting on them, right? Well, you should do this. Instead, I help them get clarity about what it is that they're ultimately after, because even myself as a business owner, I didn't really have a clear vision, and it's hard for us to sort of project into the future without a little bit of help and figure out what is that deep-seated why, that deep-seated what could this look like, because it's hard to leave all the expectations away when we think about that. So my job really with my clients is not so much as you should do this and this and this, but rather, what are you trying to do? How would you like to try to get there? What things have you done? What things do you like to do? Okay, based on this shared outcome that we've now identified we want to get to, here's a path that can take you there. Are we interested in walking this path? Would you like me to help you along with this path? And that's really my job. Well, WordPress is kind of my original community. So when I started my business, it was around a WordPress site. And I found the community here in Phoenix, and it was a game changer for me, because I had access not only to expertise, but to access to a community of which I didn't think that I really knew it could exist. The WordPress community here, I mean, especially in Phoenix, I can't speak for everywhere, but in general, is so giving. Someone will answer my question. I worked hand in hand before I even really fully appreciated how smart of a developer he was. One of the developers that runs the largest WordPress installation in the world. It powers magazines. It's amazing. And he would just give me his time. He would just tell me how to do things. He would just show me what needed to be done. So WordPress in itself, I come for the community and the relationships and the people I know here. But also, it is the largest platform. There is so much innovation happening around it. There's so much change happening around it. And just, from a marketing geek perspective, watching the trajectory of it and where it's going and what's happening in the marketplace, it's just this microcosm of a market study that I also enjoy seeing happen. So for anyone getting started out, here's the mistake I made. I thought I could do it myself. When I realized that, okay, I'm gonna run my own business, this is something I'm going to do, I was like, well, how do I not have, my parents were entrepreneurs, I have a marketing degree, I have an MBA, I've done this for other people, I basically ran divisions, so how do I not have this? I did not have it. I did not have it one little bit, not even remotely did I have it. I needed help. I needed the help of a mentor, I needed the help of a community, I needed to be able to talk to somebody who really could get it. And my husband, bless his heart, could understand me coming home having either an elation of, oh, I just landed my best deal yet, or oh my God, I screwed this up so bad, I don't know how I'm gonna fix this, I don't have to work it. He could understand to a point, but until you have somebody who really has been in the ring with you, who has done it, you cannot have that sort of unburdening or shared celebration. So finding my biz BFF was the best thing that happened, because she and I valued our businesses over our feelings. So she would be like, stop it, Brandy, you're being insane, like, no, do this, or have somebody to celebrate with. So really, for anyone getting started out, but I think specifically when it comes to women and relationships, we can feel like not enough. We can feel like too competitive. So finding a community and someone to share that experience with is, I think, the game changer for any person who's trying to be in business. And embracing the community as not competitors, but really just people in the ring with you. Because I really believe in the abundance mindset, the idea that there's more than enough business for everyone. And finding the people who are like-minded and surrounding yourself with them really makes being in business worth being in business. What I'd like to share, in addition to the things that we've talked about, is I find great pride, and that it even helps my business more, not just having a community, but having a mentor, but having people to mentor. So being able to talk to other digital agencies, seeing where they're at, seeing what they're struggling with, even if it's something I haven't experienced directly, I have a community to call on, but in helping them, I'm reminded about the things that help my business. I'm reminded about the operational stuff or the other pieces and parts that maybe got kind of swept under the rug. So having those people that I'm helping helps my business. And it's not something I think that's super intuitive. Like, why would I help somebody behind me? I need mentors to take me. Well, no, I think you need all of it. You need the peers, you need the mentors, and you need people behind you that you can help show the way. Teaching can be, I think, the best anchoring tool. Like, not only do you have to know it, but you have to have absorbed it, and it has to become part of you in order for you to turn around and be able to explain it to somebody else.
Anything else on your mind?
Don't use a Gmail address. My soapbox issue, as someone who ran email for one of the world's largest domain registrars, is Gmail addresses. They are unnecessary. It is a missed opportunity to brand yourself. I don't care if you are going to spend, if this is just maybe a freelance thing, buy a domain. Redirect that domain to whatever makes sense. Your LinkedIn page, your Facebook page, I don't care what. And brand your email address. It is free. Set up a forwarding address, send it to your existing Gmail. Like, just do it. Don't use somebody else's brand on your email address. I'll put my soapbox away now.
Thanks very much to Brandy for chatting with me at WordCamp Phoenix. She was very busy at the WordCamp, and she took 30 minutes out of her schedule to chat with me, which was awesome. You can follow Brandy on Twitter at TheFieryFX, and you can follow Kathy on Twitter at KathyZant. You can follow me at Maunder, MMAUNDER. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to get the latest episodes, or which helps us get the word out there. Thanks very much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.